Hello, everyone. And thanks once again for joining this conference today and for contributing with your questions, with your attention. A big thanks to all of our speakers and panelists that we're going to hear about in just 1 minute, and to our sponsors. These events are fun if you like events, a little bit stressful as well if you're like me, but I think that the lesson here is to do more of them, and it is fun, I guess, if I'm being honest. In the end, this is our last session for today. We have a panel discussion. The topic is women's voices in business, and probably you've read the description. Perhaps you've already met our panelists by reading their bios, which will also be available as we're doing this panel discussion. I won't be speaking too much. I'll be moderating and throwing some questions, and then I'll be letting the panelists give us their insights and their experiences. After this session is scheduled for half an hour until 4:30 EST. And after that, the networking lounge, will be open for 30 minutes this time, not 15 minutes. So once again, if people want to go in and mix and mingle and ask further questions, you may do so. If you have particular questions for any of the speakers or panelists today, you may absolutely reach out to them directly. Everyone is on LinkedIn. The social media is connected to their bios. As the old phrase goes, don't be shy to reach out and connect and set up a virtual coffee or whatever it is that you want to do. So without further ado, let's get to the panel discussion. The topic, women's voices in business, I wasn't sure how to come up with the title itself when I was thinking about this idea, because if I said something like women in business, it doesn't really explain anything. And if I said women's challenges they have to face in business, there's already a bias there and a preconceived notion. And as a man, I didn't want to overstep my boundaries either. And so I thought the best thing to do was really just to not interfere too much and put these wonderful ladies together and let them tell me what they want to talk about. And that's what we've done. So it's my pleasure to introduce this wonderful panel. And I want to give you a chance to get to know them a little bit before they get to some specific questions. So the question for everyone, and I'm going to start with Elisa, is tell us a little bit about your journey so far and where you're at today. So Elisa, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Ric. I'm excited to be a part of this panel today. So my name is Elisa Proulx. I am a certified 3V communications coach. I'm the founder of my company, Self-Assured Speakers. And today I work with professionals, with business owners, entrepreneurs who want to communicate and present themselves in a way that is more confident and more authentic. And I work with both men and women, but I have a very strong passion about supporting and empowering women in particular to own their voice in their business and in their career. And this is very much driven by my own experience being a woman in business. So I've been an entrepreneur for over 10 years now. I used to consult in communications and marketing before I got into communication coaching. And for years, even before, especially before I got into business, when I was in my 9-to-5, I had a very difficult time communicating in a professional setting. You wouldn't know it outside of that because I had not very much difficulty with it in my personal life, but in a professional setting, when I was speaking with team members or clients or whoever, I really struggled. I was not assertive. I was not confident. I struggled to articulate my ideas clearly. I believed I had no idea what I was talking about. And it was really holding me back in so many ways. And so I did some work to get to the root of what was going on. I started building up both my mindset and my communication skill set. And that was a complete game changer for me. And this was my experience, but it also has been the experience of almost every professional woman I have spoken to. I've been highly involved in the female entrepreneur community over the last 10 years in the various cities that I've lived in. And I've connected with hundreds of women who are brilliant, they are talented, they are successful, they are so good at what they do, but they have a really difficult time using their voice and communicating in ways that can propel their business forward. So things like talking about your business, selling, positioning yourself as a thought leader, advocating for yourself and for those around you, these are really important skills. And so many women have a hard time executing on these. And it's really disheartening for me to see, especially as somebody who has gone through this on my own. So I'm on a mission now to get mindset tools and communication tools into the hands of as many women as possible and help them realize what type of impact they can make.
Thank you, Elisa, for sharing that. That it's sometimes hard to share personal details, but it really helps people understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to do now. Thank you. I'm going to turn the same question over to Heather now, which is the same question of, tell us a little bit about your journey, whatever you'd like to share, and where you're at today, what you do. Heather, take it away.
So my name is Heather Chetwynd, and I founded my company, Voice to Word Consulting, in the early 2000s. I come from an ESL background, and what we do in Voice to Word is we help non-native speakers refine their English communication. And what I experienced in ESL and all the schools and colleges I worked in everywhere, and the universities, was the level was not refined enough. And professionals, like if you look at Toronto, it's about half non-native speakers, right? And they're competing with native speakers to get good jobs. And so, and even when they get a good job, there's that level of insecurity often. And that's because there are a lot of gaps in their knowledge. So, I mean, it's wonderful that they speak two, sometimes three, four, or five languages, but they have these gaps in, vocabulary, expressions, even phrasal verbs that we use all the time and don't even think about it. A phrasal verb is like turn on, turn off, turn around, turn into, right? So all of these things make it really complicated. And pronunciation is a big one. And another one is cultural expectations. So I realized that there was a real need for this one-on-one type of really focused training. With regards to finding my own voice in business, I come from, as I say, the educational field, not the corporate field, and yet I wanted to break into the corporate field. And I also I like change, I like variety, I like to be independent, I like to do what I want to do. So I did actually go through a few phases. I started another business that I thought was a nice collection of my skills and interests, because I'm also a singer and I have a background in art. So I thought educational books and tapes. I did that for a while, and then I realized it's really not what I want. It turned out to be all technology in the end, so much technology, and I threw it out, and then I started again. And then I started with this, just pronunciation. People said, no, that's not going to work. And then I just kept at it, and then I kept kind of refining my target market and realizing what people are needing on very many levels. And it's been a real exploration and very interesting for me. And I would say one of the hard parts was just feeling confident with corporations, because I had no idea what the usual way of communication was with corporations. And really it's just through, trial and error and experience. And now I feel very comfortable with that. So, it's not always a straight line to get where you want to get. And that's basically my story.
Thank you, Heather. I certainly can appreciate that. I have a very similar background, not the singing part, but I started with ESL as well. And when I first started my company in the early 2000s, 3V, I did a lot of accent reduction, working with the wonderful professional immigrants here in Toronto, and realizing what they're needing to compete and all that stuff. So certainly we have some similar war stories to compare, I'm sure.
Yes.
Good to have you here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And finally, I'd like everyone to meet Evelyn, our other panelist. Evelyn, please. What brought you here in life, and tell us a little bit about your journey, please.
Thanks, Rick. Hi, everybody. I'm Evelyn Chau, and my passion is about giving quiet or introverted professionals the tools to speak out and speak up and be heard. So about 2 years ago, I read about Silicon Valley, where Asian IT engineers are backbones of the tech industry. There are a lot of Asian American IT professionals, of course, staffing big tech companies such as Amazon and Spotify or YouTube, Meta, and you name it. They work really hard, long hours, and they're brilliant, but they like to keep to themselves. So as a result, they don't get much acknowledgement. They're not seen, not heard, and rarely valued. Even with DEI programs, they're rarely featured as poster child or poster children. And I think, it's the cultural thing, it's the cultural limitations. I then decided that I should write a book, and I have some things to contribute. And I'd like to give voice to those who are brought up to be quiet and self-effacing, in particular women. At my first job, I worked at CBC Radio for about 12 years behind the scenes, and I have gathered a lot of techniques from the on-air people and other professionals. I've gathered tools to take baby steps to come out of my cocoon, because like everybody on this panel, I tend to stay away. Well, I tend to sit at the back of any meetings and try not to be noticed. So my book is out in paperback. It's out in audio, ebook, not audio yet. And I'm doing talks and webinars and small group fireside chats to get the word out. And actually, in both senses of the word, getting the word out, it's for my book and also for my audience, for professionals, especially women from all over the world, and to help them shine in the spotlight. I don't just want to survive. I want them to thrive when they're called upon to present or give media interviews, which is, a big challenge to a lot of people. So there you go.
Thank you, Evelyn. I think a lot of people can relate. Certainly, I taught English in China 100 years ago, and that was definitely, there's a theme there of this idea of modesty and not speaking up too much, and maybe it's more, women over men and all that stuff. And so, I'm really glad that you're kind of a voice for reason, almost, to say, hey, like, it doesn't have to be that way, at least here, and that's part of the work that you're doing, and I think that's really wonderful. I'm going to start giving the first question to Elisa. We're going to give her a chance to answer the specific question, and then we'll ask Heather and Evelyn if they have anything to add. If they do. No, that's okay. But let's just start with Elisa first. So Elisa, the question is, how can women use their voice to inspire and lead others in their business or organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I love this question, and I think that it can be answered in so many ways. It's hard to like narrow it down, but for me, I think one of the things that I consistently see is that women have a very difficult time advocating for themselves. They have a hard time speaking up, taking up space, valuing what it is that they have to say. And so one of the most impactful ways that I think women can use their voice to inspire and to lead is by learning to advocate for yourself and for other women. And so what I mean by that is really embracing who you are and what you stand for, and not hesitating to speak up, to say no, or to ask for what you want. And this can look like so many different things in the workplace. It can look like negotiating a promotion. It can look like ensuring that an idea we have is heard or is considered, setting boundaries around workload and workplace dynamics. But when we learn to advocate for ourselves, I really believe that it allows us to demonstrate a sense of self-confidence and a sense of self-respect that sets the standard for how other people are going to respect us as well, right? And it also sets a really important example for other people to be able to do the same, which brings me to my second point, which is you need to be championing the voices of other women. It's like that quote, I always mess up, the rising tide lifts all boats, I believe it is. If you are in a position, you have the ability, you have the confidence, you have the influence to elevate another woman's voice around the table or in the room, or whatever it is, you need to be that tide. So this can be as simple as like celebrating somebody else's win, or bringing light to an idea that maybe is being dismissed, or bringing in a perspective that's consistently being overlooked. I just think there's such a need for more women to start seeing that value and start speaking to that value in terms of what they can contribute. So you very quickly, I guess, some very basic action steps in like, how do I even go about starting to advocate for myself? As Mark was saying earlier, it's like, let's start basic and like practice like some of the simplest things, right? And the first thing is get clear on what you're advocating for. So know what you want and be able to articulate that very clearly. I think that's like first and foremost. And then a really powerful shift that is, I don't want to say it's simple or easy, but I think it's a very powerful thing, but it's not anything too massive, is just stop using tentative language. I'm not sure if this is a good idea. Like, no, we're immediately disqualifying ourselves when we preface an idea that we're about to give by saying, I'm not sure if this is a good idea. So getting rid of that like tentative language and using more confident language instead, and then practice. I mean, start small, find those low stakes situations in your day-to-day life and practice advocating for yourself and speaking up for your ideas or for other people. And Ric, you always say your competence creates your confidence, right? So build your competence by practicing in situations or scenarios that feel safe or at the very least like less risky. So that's my thoughts on it.
Great. And I can tell you, I stole that from Tony Robbins. One of his seminars. And I wrote that. I thought that was brilliant. I wrote it down, and so that was many years ago, but I never forgot it. So let's keep it alive. Okay. Heather, would you like to add anything to the same question?
I just wanted to bring in the part about people who are like second language speakers, not non-native speakers, who are often quiet and or just reserved, or maybe not sure they're following, or all these different aspects. And that when we talk about how you can lead others, I think that's important to try to bring those people out, give them that space, ask them directly, what they think about things, and bring them out. And the other point that you mentioned about tentative language, I think that's a real struggle for people who are not native speakers from Canada, because we have all this side of softening the language so that we're not rude, and then trying to be clear but also not rude, right? It's quite a difficult thing to learn. So being aware of that, I think that's really important, because sometimes people sound really kind of brash and they're not, or they sound really tentative, and it's just because they're trying to be polite. So that awareness is important for everyone.
Excellent point about the mixed messaging. Exactly. Use softer skills, but at the same time be direct. It's like, well, which one is it? Very good. Excellent. Right. Excellent. Evelyn, do you have anything to add to this first question?
I do echo Heather's point about it being very nuanced. And I think, we have to be patient, because it takes quite a while to get it just right. It's almost like walking a tightrope, right? You just have to keep at it and be very mindful. I do have another suggestion, that is to find a role model, someone who has similar values as you, male or female, and model their voice to lead others. I started a group called Women with Presence, and I found something very interesting. That is Elon Musk. His boss is actually a woman. So her name is Robin Denham, and she is the chairman of Tesla. So imagine being in that position, having to, balance out views and be very, very calm and collected. So, I was just so impressed by her, and, I intend to find out more about her. And, of course, everybody has their own values and their own role models, but, that's something that we can, those people are we can learn from them.
Yeah. When we talk about management, and sometimes at Yeti and all this stuff, teaching entrepreneurs, I always tell the story about my favorite manager I've ever had in my entire life, and it's a woman named Marilyn. I'm not going to go to the story now, but I think that's the gender doesn't necessarily matter. It's like, hey, if you've got a good management style, you can role model. That's something you can do, whether speaking or managing people or conflict management. So role models are very important, regardless of the gender. Excellent. I'm going to go to the question 2. This is for Heather. We're going to start with Heather first. And the question is this: what are some of the unique challenges women face when trying to assert their voice in business? And are there any tips that you can provide to help them overcome these?
Okay, I think that voice is really interesting. And if anyone watched Tom Bradshaw's presentation, I'm sorry I couldn't finish it. He talked a lot about the physical voice. So you can look at literal and figurative in terms of the voice. So the literal voice would be the physical voice, speaking up at a meeting and Do you speak quickly or slowly? Do you speak through your nose, etc. And then the figurative is what I would also call the social voice. So are you asserting yourself appropriately? Are you insecure? Are you able to disagree with your boss, for example? And this is really related to cultural conditioning, which is not just international culture, but even your own family culture and local culture. So with the physical voice, let's say we're in a meeting, timing is really important. So if you look at culture, some cultures will speak before you're quite finished. Others will give a little time afterwards to show that they respect. And in North America, if you wait, like when that person finishes, you can't talk before they finish. That's interrupting. But if you wait, that's it. Someone's taken that space. So knowing about timing is important. Projection is really important. So I know that some cultures have values around how loud you should be, and how, it's pushy or it's rude to be loud. But, you can project your voice without being loud. And that's around support, which Tom was talking about quite a bit. So then when we talk about the social voice, well, what we just mentioned around softening, that was really important to learn. Like I had a client who's in charge of health and safety. And she was going in and saying, perhaps we could do this. And I said, no, you have to say, I highly recommend this, because they dealt with serious, strong chemicals, right? Also clarifying, like, some people who are like second language speakers don't, or maybe even if you're new, young people also the same thing. They don't want to bring attention to the fact that they may not be understanding correctly. And I had a client that didn't clarify, and therefore the company made a huge mistake, and it cost a lot of money. So just knowing he didn't think it was really right to say, okay, so you're saying this, which is really a form of clarifying, right? And when you get feedback, for example, understanding the feedback, right? And do you defend yourself, or do you just listen to understand? So I think that there's a lot of things to consider around culture, especially, and a lot of these things are across the board. Like these are skills that everyone needs to learn. But for people who come from a different culture, there's a feeling there that they've ingrained in themselves, and it feels rude to do some of these things that we want them to do. So understanding that's important. How your own psychology, and listening to yourself too. Like, what are you saying to yourself about, your communication? So that's all what it is, goes together for communicating effectively and being heard with your voice, both the physical voice and the social voice.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, it's a good reminder that communication is this large umbrella term, right? There's so many aspects of communication. As you said, there's cultural expectations and practices. There's voice, there's accent, there's, of course, interpersonal, there's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of things that all of us have to unpack.
Yeah.
Evelyn, is there anything you'd like to add to Heather's comments and questions?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Elisa, anything to add?
Yeah, briefly, I think just kind of adding on when you said about your own psychology and like the way you communicate to yourself. And I think that in my experience and the women that I've worked with, one of the biggest challenges that I see in terms of women being assertive is this internalized self-doubt that we carry around. And I kind of spoke to this in the last question, but we really doubt the value of our own voice and our right to use it. And I think that a huge reason for this, and why exercising assertiveness can feel very intimidating to a lot of women, is because of the societal expectations around how women should communicate. And we were raised with, and still very much face the double standard that if men assert themselves, they are celebrated because they are direct and good for them, and they know what they want and how to ask for it. But if women assert themselves, they're often called difficult or seen as too aggressive, or they really need to tone it down, right? And then on the flip side, talk about mixed messages. If we don't assert ourselves, then we're a pushover, or we're too emotional, so it's a really tricky territory to navigate, and it can feel very intimidating. And I think that's a huge reason why women don't try speaking up or don't try asserting themselves altogether. But I also think that's all the more reason to learn strategies and practice finding a style that feels authentic to you. So.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the idea that there's a rationale to having support groups of some type, right? Whether it's training, and whether it's there's women entrepreneur groups, there's women-led businesses, there's women this, women that, and some people might say, well, I really don't like it when people separate into one category or another. But just as you're speaking, it seems like, well, maybe it is nice to have the same, people of that tribe in that one room to speak freely and share. I think that's a good idea. I'm going to go to the last question before we take audience questions. So Evelyn, we're going to start with you, please. And the question is this: what tips or techniques can you share to overcome anxiety and nerves that come with speaking in public?
I have quite a few, but I suggest reverse engineering. So let's say you have a big talk coming up. I suggest you visualize what you want from the public speaking occasion. If it's a media interview, what do you want the public to hear about your company? If you're giving a talk, how would you like your audience to benefit? Once you have that vision, start making a plan. What do you want to do 3 weeks before the big day? How about 3 days before or 3 hours before? So once you have that goal firmed up, you write down what you will do to achieve that. Just then do it methodically. When you do that, you'll have a plan working in reverse. Do you want to eliminate something? What do you want to add? Do you want to use words that give you more authority, and drop words that may weaken your speech? Instead of I think, try I propose. Instead of saying, I'm not really an expert on this, but just come out and say it with strength and authority. Of course, it's best to back up your statement with research and data. People love data. As long as you keep it to a minimum, you'll sleep a lot better, and the butterflies in the stomach will calm down. Also, on the way to your venue, let's say you're walking towards a big auditorium, you may want to practice breath work, because it's one of my favorites. It's the square breath, which is like a box, right? It's also called a box breath. So breathe into a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale to a count of 4, and relax for 4. And it's so effective that the US Navy SEALs, you do it for focus. Focus and control and calm. So it's great for walking, because when you walk, each step or each count is about the same length. So you can do 1, 2, 3, 4. And while you're waiting in some office, maybe, in a doctor's office, or while you're walking the dog, you can do that too, because breathing is so primal, it's so free, right? And no one even needs to know you're doing it. It's just like, it's a secret weapon.
Thank you. It is a secret weapon. And, Mark and I talked about it earlier. Tom's talked about it. You're talking about it. It seems like, and again, to say what Mark and what Elisa were saying, like sometimes the simple things work the best, right? I mean, getting your breath under control with the box exercise or a different one, like you said, the Marines are using it, and there's speakers out there using it. Why can't we all use it? Interview or whatever. So I love that tip. And I personally use it all the time. I use a little bit different version I learned from Tony Robbins a long time ago, but it was the same idea of a breath control to make sure that you are centering yourself right before a big thing that's going to get you nervous. So that's great advice. I'm going to turn over to Heather. Is there anything you'd like to add to this? Any tips or anything like that?
Well, I was just in relation to the anxiety. I always think about the mind, what we're saying to ourselves. And so whenever you go into a situation, it's so important to be clear on your intention, like what is the outcome that you want and what can you control? That's important. And then focus on that. Don't start listening to, oh my God, that person, maybe they're, you start interpreting, it's like guessing what people are thinking and you don't know. So just focus on what you can control, and watch your mental talk, your internal talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite
Very
a
good.
skill, like to start learning that, because a lot of people just don't pay attention to it.
Good. And Elisa, anything to add to the conversation?
Yeah, just to build on what you were just saying, Heather, actually, in terms of like the intention, when you're visualizing your audience and you're thinking about your audience, a really important shift that you can make with your mindset is to focus more on what you're giving to your audience rather than on what you're doing or how you are being perceived by your audience. Like, I think shifting that mindset away from, or what are they going to think of me, or what if, did that make sense, or that type of mental chatter that's going on can be really distracting, and it can just help you like stay in that negative, anxious state. Shift it to, how can I add value to them, right? Focus on serving your audience. And I just think it makes the experience less about perfection and having it to get your delivery perfect, and more about the quality of the information they're getting. And I also think when you are going into a talk where you have your audience in mind, you're more likely to make that connection with them. And I feel like as you are connecting with your audience, you feel like you can be more yourself with them, right? So that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Q&A now from the audience. And I see there's already a question from Yang. And she asks, when you disagree with your boss, what would you say? So any quick strategies for when you disagree with your boss? So this is an open question. You can answer it any way you like. Who wants to start with this one? It's an open question.
Well,
Heather, go ahead.
maybe I'll start. I think it really depends. There's no pat answer for that. I think it's important to know what were you hired for? Because sometimes you were hired for something, for your expertise in a certain area, and your boss doesn't have that expertise. And even though he's your boss, and that's another difference also, that sometimes in some countries, your boss has more experience than you. But in Canada, a lot of times the boss or the manager doesn't know much about your area. So it's important for you to share what you think that may be quite different. But then there's learning how to do that, which is not a little short answer. Knowing how to word it and, put it in there, and then knowing your boss too. So.
Elisa.
I think something that can, like one kind of little strategy or a little tactic that can help is trying to balance like empathy and understanding with being assertive. So even just like starting the conversation with, I appreciate your perspective on this, and thank you for your perspective on this, and then going into why you like, I happen to disagree and here's why, right? Like adding that little bit of empathy and understanding, I think can make it more collaborative, I guess, than being confrontational.
Yeah.
Evelyn, any tips of how to fight with the boss and not get fired?
Yeah, it all depends on how close you are to the boss. Sometimes, you're drinking buddies, and so you can say anything you want. But if you bring up the good of the company, again, it really depends on the circumstance, because it might sound like you're preaching if you say, the company needs this. Then the boss might say, what do you think? Like, I always put the company before me. And so it can be, very complicated, but and there's no one way of dealing with it. But I just think that you have to read the room. You have to know your boss, and speak authentically and from the heart, and it should be okay.
Very good. We have another question. This is from Dorota, who is in Vienna, as far as I remember. And she asks, how do you deal with male colleagues who are intimidated by a confident, qualified woman? Great question. Who wants that one first? Elisa.
I am going to say that I don't know necessarily about tactics or anything, but the first thing that comes to my mind is it's not your responsibility to be concerned about whether or not they are intimidated by you. Like, I think if they're intimidated, that's something that is on them. You know what I mean? I think that as long as you are, or if they're intimidated by strong, competent women in general, then that's something that they need to deal with. And I think that for you, you need to work or focus on how you are presenting yourself, ensuring that you are, navigating that balance between being empathetic, being collaborative, being assertive, and focusing as much as you can on you presenting yourself the best way to get the results that you need with them, right? And not worrying too much about, is he going to be intimidated by me? Because you can't really control that. I don't know if that's
Very nice perspective. Heather, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Elisa answered that pretty well. I would only add that, how do you know that they're intimidated? That sometimes we call that a mind read. You can think that, but maybe it's something else. So, but again, it's not really your responsibility as long as you're behaving in the way that Elisa was talking about. Yeah.
Good. Evelyn, anything to add to that?
Another perspective is to deal with all male colleagues as if they are intimidated by you, but not speaking out about it. But in your daily dealings, try to make sure that they feel valued by you. And I think that would be a very good background or foundation to work on.
Great. This is good. I'm just going back to the chat. Colleen. Hey, Colleen Clark is our world famous corporate trainer and a board member for NCCA Canada. Colleen asks, or she says, yes, and is a great way to disagree with anyone. So just kind of saying yes, and I assume here the idea is that it's less confrontational, but you're still putting forward your sort of point afterwards. So yes, and, yes, but. Well, yes, and is better than yes, but, I think. Any other specific techniques or tips that we could throw out there to people? Any phrases that might be useful?
Yeah, be careful about but. Because a lot of people, they think they're supposed to say something like, thank you, I appreciate your thing, but. So basically with the word but, they've negated everything they've said.
Yeah.
So be careful about those little words. Yeah.
Yes. And in prof, they actually say that the word but is a conversation killer. So yes, and is always, very inclusive, and it's very positive.
Great. I'm just checking the chat to make sure there's any other questions. Okay. Looks like right now there's no more questions. So I'd like to say thank you very much, panelists, for a wonderful job and for great insight. I think even though the target might appear to be giving women advice, obviously there's also the other target, which is that men should be listening as well to have more empathy and understanding, and maybe figure out there's some lessons there as well. So thank you, all three of you, for joining us today and for contributing your thoughts. And let's meet in the lounge. And if anyone can meet us in the lounge, please do. But in the meantime, I'm wrapping this up, this panelist. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Really do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. See you in the lounge.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.